Hello and welcome to Wild Old Times, a podcast about the stranger corners of Ireland and Irish history. My name is Ciaran Conliffe, and today's episode is kind of a weird sequel to an earlier episode. We're going to look at one of Ireland's most famous and yet also obscure playwrights. His name was Dion Boucicault. I've always been fascinated by people who are extremely well known in their day, but are almost forgotten about today. For example, Edward Bulwer Lytton was one of the most famous writers of his time, on the same level as Charles Dickens. People still quote his books without even realizing they're doing it, an example being whenever anyone says that the pen is mightier than the sword. Nowadays, if anyone knows his name at all, they know it for the Bulwer Lytton Fiction Contest, which was created by an English professor at a Californian university in 1983 as a contest of bad writing. The idea was to write the worst possible opening line to a novel, and it was extremely popular online in the early days of the internet. The reason it was named after Bulwer Lytton was to mock the opening of his novel Paul Clifford, which is, "It was a dark and stormy night, and the rain fell in torrents, except at occasional intervals where it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept up the streets. For it is in London that our scene lies, rattling along the housetops and fiercely agitating the scanty flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness." Incidentally, I find the contest and the dismissal of Bulwer Lytton's writing both extremely mean-spirited and surprisingly narrow-minded from someone who is supposed to be teaching people about English literature. Writing styles evolve, as does the language, and judging something written in the Victorian Gothic style by modern standards is not really fair or useful. Some people might say that "it was a dark and stormy night" is a cliché, but I don't think you can say that about the person who invented the phrase. Reminds me of the joke about the person who reads Shakespeare and then complains that all he did was take a bunch of well-known phrases and tie them together into plays. Anyway, my point is that Bulwer Lytton wrote 30 successful novels and 7 hit plays, including one of the earliest science fiction novels and a horror novel that influenced Dracula. And yet nowadays he's almost forgotten. He's only one example of this, and another is today's subject, Dion Boucicault. Dion was born in Dublin in 1820, the day after Christmas. That's St. Stephen's Day to the Irish and Boxing Day to the English. His mother was Anne Boucicault, who was born as Anne Darley. The Darleys were a well-off Dublin family, related to the Guinnesses among others. Anne's brother George was a poet who was well known in Bohemian circles, though less so outside them, and her other brother Charles was the first professor of English literature at University College Cork. Anne married a man of Huguenot descent named Samuel Boucicault. Huguenots, incidentally, were French Protestants who fled to England in the mid-17th century to escape persecution by the Catholic French monarchy. While most of them settled in London, their descendants went all over the country. Samuel was a wine merchant, and he might have met Anne through the Guinness connection, as his family were investors in their bank. They were married in 1813, when Samuel was 44 years old and Anne was only 18. By 1820, they had 4 children, but their marriage was under severe strain, probably due to Samuel's business failing. The details were a little fuzzy, but it seems like they were unofficially separated by the start of 1820. Around that time, Anne became quite close to a lecturer at Trinity College Dublin named Dionysius Lardner, who we've previously done an episode on. Dionysius was also married to a woman named Cecilia and had 2 children, but they might also have been separated at this time. Some sources say that Dionysius and Anne were childhood friends who reconnected and commiserated over their failed marriages. It does seem quite likely they began a relationship of some sort, based on later events. One of those events was when Cecilia gave birth to a boy and named him Dionysius Lardner Boucicault. Even though she put Samuel's name on the birth certificate as the father, most people assumed he was the product of her affair. Cecilia, the wife of Dionysius Lardner, definitely believed it. When she found out that Anne was pregnant, she denounced her husband publicly as an adulterer, and the two permanently separated. And when Dionysius moved to London in 1827 to become the first ever professor of natural philosophy and astronomy at University College London, Anne and all but one of her children moved there with him. Dion was educated in London and eventually decided his future lay on the stage. It's clear from an early age that Dion had a passion for theatre. He first appeared on stage in a school play at the age of 17, and he enjoyed it so much he wrote his own play. It was called The Old Guard and began as a proposed epilogue to Pizarro, the first play he ever starred in. When he finished school, his mother may have forced him to become an apprentice to Dionysius Lardner as an engineer, but he hated it and moved out to the west of England, taking on acting jobs in places like Gloucester and Cheltenham. His mother considered acting to be beneath his dignity, so he used the name of Lee Morton. It was under that name that he was hired by Charles Hill to be part of a company based out of the Brighton Theatre Royal. This was where, in 1838, a short play he had written was staged for the first time. That play was called A Legend of the Devil's Dyke. It was about the legend surrounding a striking feature of the Sussex Downs outside Brighton, a steep V-shaped valley about 100 metres deep and a kilometre long. The legend is that it was carved by the devil to let the sea flood in and wipe out the Sussex residents who had just converted to Christianity. St. Cuthman was alerted to his plans by a holy revelation and made a wager with the devil. If he could complete his work in a single night, he would get Cuthman's soul, but if not, he would abandon the project. When it reached midnight and Cuthman saw the progress the devil had made, he decided he had to cheat. He lit a fire to make it look as if the sun was rising and startled a cockerel into crowing. The devil was tricked into thinking he had lost the bet and left. The play was not a success, and neither was Dion's other work that he wrote that year, A Lover by Proxy. Feeling disheartened, he moved to Bristol and then to Hull, where his first full-length play, Jack Sheppard, was performed. Although it was fairly successful, it was around this time that his mother left Dionysus and moved back to Dublin. The allowance to Dion was kept up for the moment, but it was on the condition that he moved back to Dublin with her. So he did, and that was where he got involved in his first great scandal, allegedly. In 1839, he took a job as a clerk at the Guinness Brewery. He was a relative of the family, after all, and the Guinnesses were known to take care of their own. The Guinness Brewery had been established in 1759 by Arthur Guinness, the second brewery he owned. His success in business was enough for him to marry into the wealthy Whitmore family. His son, also named Arthur, took over the brewery when Arthur the Elder died in 1803. By 1839, Arthur II was 70 years old and was looking to pass the brewery on to the next generation. His eldest son, William, had become a clergyman, so his two younger sons, Arthur Lee Guinness and Benjamin Lee Guinness, were being trained up for the role. The expectation was probably that Arthur Lee would inherit ownership of the brewery and Benjamin would take over the banking side of his father's business. However, then Dion Boucicault entered the picture. Thing is, Arthur Lee Guinness was homosexual. That seems pretty clear, looking at his later life. Dion was not. He might have been bisexual, or he might have been young and experimenting, or he might just have been a cynical opportunist who strung Arthur along. Arthur was only 23 after all, and seems to have been relatively innocent. Either way, something took place between the two men. And then something took place between Dion and the Guinness family. We'll probably never know the exact details of what happened. The only thing that sheds any kind of light on it is a letter from Arthur Lee to his father, written in June of 1839. In it, he begs his father for forgiveness in truly heartbreaking language. He doesn't say for what. In 1840, the brewery partnership agreement was rewritten. Arthur Sr. was listed as the head, but Benjamin was the manager and would go on to inherit the business. Arthur Lee was no longer part of it. He was given £12,000 to buy out his expectation of inheritance. He purchased a house in South Dublin and an estate in Connemara. Arthur Lee became a respected and beloved part of the Irish artistic community and died in 1863, the age of 65, having never married. As for Dion, he turned up back in London in the summer of 1840 with a suspiciously full bank account and telling no stories of his time in Dublin. He enrolled in Fanny Kelly's Theatre and Dramatic School on Dean Street to study acting, but he was forced to drop out when his allowance from Dionysius Lardner came to an end. This was because Dionysius fled London with another man's wife, for reasons we discussed in an earlier podcast. As for Dion, he got back onto the stage. He was still using the name of Lee Morton, and this turned out to be responsible for the biggest lucky break of his career. When he tried to get a meeting with Charles Matthews, the manager of the Covent Garden Theatre, Matthews mistook him for a playwright named Madison Morton. Matthews asked him to write a 5-act comedy set in modern times, and Dion did just that. When he presented it to Matthews, the manager realised his mistake, but he also realised that the play was actually very good. He paid Dion £300 for it, 200 less than he would have paid Madison Morton, still far more than Dion had ever been paid for a play before. That play was London Assurance, and it would be the first great success of Dion's career. London Assurance is a comedy structured around the relationship of Sir Harcourt Courtley, his son Charles, and Sir Harcourt's fiancée Grace. Sir Harcourt is 57 and Grace is only 18, but she is marrying him because her inheritance is dependent on it. This was a contract between her dead father and Sir Harcourt. If she does not marry him, then Charles will inherit her father's money. Charles is heavily in debt due to his wild living, but has hidden this from his father. He courts Grace under a false name to try to ruin his father's engagement, but things soon escalate beyond his control. The play premiered on the 4th of March 1841 and was an immediate smash success. Initially, it did not have Dion's name on the ads, and the writing was actually credited to him and the actor John Brougham. This was because a lot of the dialogue had been rewritten in rehearsals. As soon as he saw how successful it was, though, Dion decided to drop his pseudonym and put his real name on it. John Brougham's name was removed, which led to a lawsuit and to Brougham being replaced in the cast as well. The play ran for 3 months with 69 performances, an unusually high number for the time, and the writing was particularly praised in the reviews. It went on to be staged in New York that summer, and it has appeared many more times in the years that followed. One of its most famous stagings was in 1970 by the Royal Shakespeare Company, with Judi Dench playing the part of Grace. All of this success soon went to Dion's head. When his next play, The Irish Heiress, was a flop, he blamed anyone but himself. He burned his bridges at Covent Garden and moved to the Haymarket Theatre instead. There, repeat success continued to evade him, but he managed to make a living translating and adapting successful French plays instead. This led to him travelling back and forth between London and Paris, and this is probably when he changed to the French spelling of his surname. It was during these trips to Paris that he met Anne Guyot. We know shockingly little about Anne, which is mostly because of the looser record-keeping of the time. We know that she was French, that she was a widow, that she was quite a bit older than Dion, and that she was rich. They were married in 1845 in St. Mary at Lambeth Church in London. Some point during the next 3 years, Anne died. Some stories say that she was quite ill and that this was why Dion married her. Dion told everyone she died in a skiing accident. Either way, he inherited her fortune and quickly managed to spend it all. In fact, he even had to declare bankruptcy at one point. His original work was failing to catch on much at this point, and his greatest success was with one of the French adaptations. This was The Corsican Brothers, which was adapted from a French dramatization of a novel by Alexandre Dumas. The novel is about a pair of twins who were born conjoined. Although the doctors were able to separate them, they share a telepathic link, and after one is killed in a duel, the other sets out to avenge him. Dion wrote his adaptation for the Princess Theatre, which was being run by the Irish-born actor Charles Keane. The swashbuckling action of the play was ideal for Keane, and it was a massive success. Queen Victoria reportedly came to see it 5 times and drew a picture of the duel scene in her diary. One of the most notable parts of the play was when the dead twin's ghost returns to visit his brother. Dion designed a special effect where the ghost could rise up from the ground as he approached his twin, and it amazed audiences so much that the mechanism was installed in all the theatres that showed the play. I'll post a link to a YouTube video showing how the contraption worked in the show notes, as I think it's a fantastic example of the inventiveness of Victorian stagecraft. Although the professional combination of Dion and Charles Keane was clearly a good one, the personal combination soon hit some snags. There was a 19-year-old Scottish actress in the company named Agnes Kelly Robertson. Under the law at the time, unmarried women under the age of 21 required a man to act as their legal guardian, and Keane was the guardian for Agnes. He was understandably upset when he found out that Dion was having an affair with her. In 1852, Dion had taken the lead role in a play called The Vampire that he had adapted from a French original, with Agnes at the female lead. He would later rename the play The Phantom, probably due to penny dreadfuls like Varney the Vampire changing the association of the word to bloodsuckers rather than ghosts. It was during the play that their relationship began, though it wasn't until the following year that Charles Keane found out. Agnes wanted to marry Dion, but that would have required Keane's permission under British law. So Dion went to his friend Ben Webster, who was the manager of the Adelphi Theatre. He borrowed the money from him to buy Agnes and himself 2 tickets by steamship to New York City. Once in New York, the two were married. Agnes made her stage debut in America shortly thereafter. Some sources say that her first appearance was in Montreal, other that Dion had arranged for her to appear at Burton's Theatre in New York. Either way, she was an immediate success. Dion became partners with another Irishman who went by the name of Captain William Stewart. His real name was Edmund O'Flaherty, and he was actually a fugitive who had fled England due to his involvement in various financial crimes. The pair leased several theatres in New York, Washington, and New Orleans to put on runs of Dion's plays. In 1856, Dion was involved in lobbying for better copyright protection for playwrights, which is ironic given that so much of his work involved rewriting foreign material. For example, his first big American hit was based on a French play called Les Pauvres de Paris. He recreated it as The Poor of New York. First act takes place during the financial crash of 1837, and the rest of the play is set 20 years later during the crash of 1857. Dion released the play in December of 1857, so it was all still fresh in people's minds. The finale was one of the most ambitious stage set pieces that had ever been done at the time. It involved a man rushing into a burning building to save a document. With a combination of metal frames, cloth treated with chemicals, real fire, and cunning staging, Dion was able to create a realistic inferno on the stage that amazed the crowds. The rear of the stage also had a long curtain with flames painted on it, and was set rolling to be constantly moving upwards. The crowning piece of drama came when a real fire engine was driven onto the stage to put the fire out, creating a cloud of steam and smoke, from which the actor emerged triumphant with the document. The play was a massive success, both due to the spectacle of the finale and to its grounding in recent events. He followed it up with Jessie Brown, which had Agnes in the title role. She played a young Scottish woman who was caught up in the Sepoy Rebellion in India. This event, known at the time as the Indian Mutiny, had taken place only months before. Dion took his inspiration from the account of an English lady who was rescued from the siege of Lucknow, which let him claim this was all based on a true story. Again, the play was a great success. Dion then turned his attention to the one topic that was dominating American society at the time, the slavery debate. This led to probably his most controversial play, the Octoroon. Octoroon is a word that Dion is credited with inventing. He took it from quadroon, which is an archaic term for a person who has 3 ethnically white grandparents and 1 ethnically black grandparent. Such a person could be said to be a quarter black. However, under American law, whether someone was a slave or was free was considered to be based on their mother's status. And almost all mixed-race children were the result of white men raping enslaved women. So no matter how much white ancestry someone had, the black ancestry they inherited from their mother was enough to condemn them to slavery. Such is the case for Zoe, the heroine of the Octoroon, who appears completely white. In fact, she was played by an entirely white woman, Agnes Robertson. The play is about the romance between her and a young man who has inherited a southern plantation, who does not realize she is legally part of the property he has inherited. The story contrasts between the political maneuvers of the rich white landowners and the suffering of the slaves they treat as bargaining chips. It was another great success, serving as a lightning rod for discussion about a topic that would lead to war in less than 2 years' time. The play also has 2 alternate endings. In the original ending, Zoe commits suicide at the end to avoid being sold to the villain of the story, unaware that he has been defeated. When Dion brought it to the stage in London the following year, he wrote an alternate ending where Zoe and the hero leave Louisiana for Europe, where they can be married. This type of marriage would have been illegal under American laws at the time. It's generally considered a weaker ending, though possibly more acceptable to an audience who didn't have the broader context for the play. Dion followed the Octoroon up with the biggest success of his career so far, and the first play he ever wrote that leaned into his Irish identity. This was The Colleen Bawn. It was a play based on the novel The Collegians, which was in turn based on the real-life murder of Ellen Scanlon. I intend to do a full episode about this tragic case someday soon, so I won't go into too much detail about the plot, or indeed about the cultural impact of the play. All that matters is that it was a massive success, enough so that Dion was able to negotiate to be paid royalties for it rather than a flat fee. It became such a phenomenon that even a writer for Punch magazine, a notoriously anti-Irish publication, had to admit he'd gone to see it. Dion made a lot of money from the play, but he spent it almost as quickly. He needed another hit, and he got it in the form of Aaron a Pogue. This was a play set during the 1798 rebellion, and it demonstrates Dion's ability to play both sides of the Irish issue. In the 1986 play Heavenly Bodies by Stuart Parker, one character says that Dion loves to play the poacher so long as he's still officially the gamekeeper. This refers mostly to Dion's behaviour in relation to Aaron a Pogue. He wrote one version of the play for its run in Dublin, and another in England, and another for America, each designed to cater to that audience. The most cynical aspect of this was his treatment of the rebel song, The Wearing of the Green. Although he later claimed to have been forced to take it out of the English version after a notorious Fenian bombing, this was not true. In fact, he left the song out of the Dublin version, where it would have been controversial, and then added it into the English version where it was just a curiosity. Then for the American run, he spread a rumour that the song had been banned throughout the British Empire, a lie that everyone wanted to believe. The song became an anthem for the American branch of the Fenian movement, and Dion's version is still the most popular version of the song. After Aaron a Pogue, both Dion and Agnes retired from acting, as Dion thought that he could support himself entirely through writing plays. He was wrong. His most successful play during this period was called Formosa, which is an old word for the island now known as Taiwan. It was successful because the main character is a prostitute, and the scandal made it much more interesting to the general public. In contrast, his much anticipated third Irish play, The Rapparee, was a failure. He and Agnes moved back to New York, where he made another attempt with a comedy called Daddy O'Dowd. It also fell flat. Unable to get any massive hits, Dion made up for it with volume, writing 32 plays in 10 years. And then, in November of 1874, he premiered The Chocron. The play is probably Dion's most overtly political. It is about a Fenian who is transported to Australia, but who escapes and returns to Ireland. This was based on true events, though escapees like this usually fled to America. He is helped to escape by a poacher, or chocron, named Con, who has been supplying food to his fiancée and sister. Con was played by Dion himself, and was considered one of his greatest stage roles. He played an old Irish fellow of a type that was recognisable to anyone from Ireland, and quite distinct from the stage Irish archetype. The other characters were equally well developed, though that was part of how Dion defanged some of his political commentary. His hero's motivation isn't political, it's revenge on the British agent who betrayed him. By the time The Chocron was released, Dion and Agnes had effectively ended their marriage. She had returned to London in 1873, while he stayed in New York with his lover, an English actress named Catherine Rogers. He still maintained some contact with Agnes, and she actually stepped in to play a role in the London performance of The Chocron at only 24 hours' notice, when the original actress couldn't make it. The London audience were delighted to see the two acting opposite each other again. Despite what one might expect, the Fenian content of the play was surprisingly uncontroversial. This might actually have annoyed Dion, who had hoped the play would show his support for Irish nationalism. In 1876, after the play's run had ended, he wrote an open letter to Benjamin Disraeli asking for an amnesty for Fenian political prisoners, and saying that this was the message of the play. This proved to be massively unpopular with the English newspapers, and both sides of the political divide there condemned him. On the other hand, it boosted his popularity in Dublin tremendously. This was enhanced when Dion set aside a portion of the profits from the play to establish a fund that would support the families of political prisoners. The Chocron was Dion's last great success. In 1880, he rewrote Daddy O'Dowd as a new play called The O'Dowd. There was a commentary on the politics of Parnell and the Land League, but it largely fizzled out. In 1884, he wrote a historical play about the life of Irish rebel Robert Emmet that was an absolute bomb. Nearly bankrupted him, so he went on a tour of Australia to earn some money. While there, he married Louise Thorndyke, a 21-year-old actress. At the time, Dion was 65. He was also, unfortunately for him, still married to Agnes. In fact, she had tried to divorce him in 1880, but he had contested the divorce and it hadn't been finalised. Now she was able to sue him for bigamy, winning both the divorce and a considerable financial settlement. Dion was forced to sell the rights to most of his plays to pay her. Dion had 6 children with Agnes, 3 of whom also went into the theatre. 2 of them played key roles in the creation of one of the most classic British stories, Peter Pan, the boy who wouldn't grow up. Nowadays it's mostly remembered as a novel and a Disney movie, but it started as a play in 1904. Dion's daughter Nina played Peter Pan in the premiere, beginning the tradition of having him played by a woman. And Dion Boucicault Jr. was the manager who brought it to the stage. He might have had a bond with J.M. Barrie, the creator of the play. Peter Pan was based on Barrie's older brother, who died in an accident aged only 14. And Dion Jr. had been born as Darley George Boucicault. He changed his name after his older brother Dion William Boucicault died in a railway accident in 1876, aged only 17. The 2 men both had brothers who, like Peter Pan, would never grow up. The play opened on the 27th of December 1904. Unlike Dion's play, Peter Pan is one of the stories that has stuck around. But it's not like Dion has been entirely forgotten. His plays continue to be revived and played every so often. Aaron a Pogue was revived in the 2010s, for example, as was London Assurance. Both The Colleen Bawn and The Poor of New York have each been made into 3 movies, with The Poor of New York also becoming a musical. And in 2014, the black playwright Brandon Jacobs Jenkins did his own adaptation of The Octoroon. Perhaps that was the most fitting fate for Dion's work, given how often he adapted other people's plays to make his own stories. Though I think Dion's biggest regret might have been that when this was done, his plays had gone out of copyright and he'd have received no payment for it. He regarded theatre as a business rather than a passion, after all. Despite that, he continued to act and write plays up until 1888, when poor health forced him to retire from the stage. He became the manager of the drama school at Madison Square Garden, and he died in New York in September 1890. Following century, when the Irish national culture reinvented itself, he was left behind in the dust. For 30 years, he was Ireland's most famous playwright. Nowadays, he's one of its most obscure. But at least now you know the wild old story of Dion Boucicault. This has been Wild Old Times, a podcast about the stranger corners of Ireland and Irish history. The opening theme is The Cat That Ate the Candle. The closing theme is The Parting Glass. Both were recorded by Gregory Mahan and are used under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of Greg's music at tinwhistler.com. Our logo is by Liffy Designs. Wild Old Times is recorded at Farset Labs in Belfast. If you enjoyed the podcast, give it a review wherever you find it. It really does help the show. If you really enjoyed it, tell your friends. Either way, I hope to see you again for another wild old time from Irish history.